reads. This house would ban exclusive youth recruitment agencies, example, first option deals, between professional clubs and youth academies. I call upon the Prime Minister to begin the debate. Here, here.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Just a second. This debate is specifically about the young people in these youth academies who suffer at opposition because they're locked into clubs which they never wanted, because they're locked in salaries that are underpaid, and because these youth academies are never able to get the capacity to train them. The first thing I want to talk about is just how are these agreements made and why are they made in the worst ways. First, these players are kids like 12 to 15 years old in these youth academies. They often just do not even understand things about contracts or get the information regarding contracts from the youth clubs because these are kids, and if you share information to them, it's of no use for you. Therefore, most negotiations happen between the club and academy management without the information trickling down to the kids because they never ask for it because they just do not know it. And even if opposition wants to say that, oh, parents are included, they also have huge information asymmetry and do not understand the market value regardless, or legal clauses that are included in these huge contracts. Like my mom at best knows Ronaldo and Messi, and she doesn't know much about football. And even if they do know, they do not know about how the market works in the club sector anyway. So, but also they just do not have often much money to even hire good lawyers because your kid is just still starting. He's not earning a lot of money, and probably you are likely to not be very rich in most instances. So you also do not get support from them. That means the clubs and the youth academies are the only actors who often do these agreements. But second, many of these academies are locked to the clubs for any money that they can get because it is often hard for these youth academies to find investors because they see that these youth academies are often risky investment due to the huge difference between professional and youth football. So oftentimes these clubs, if they sign the exclusive deal at the first place, get insane leverage to dictate the terms of how they want the youth to be trained and stuff like that. But third, these agreements that are often signed at opposition also have no cap on the duration of how long this exclusive deal can go because the bigger clubs are able to leverage over youth academies to pressure them in a corner. The reason is that youth academies can also not call out them because they often the management of these youth academies really needs money and have very little less call out against them. And geographically also they often get offers from just 1 to 2 clubs in their areas for exclusive deals because in specifically exclusive deals, clubs do not want to invest in youth academies which are in far off areas because it makes the travel of these kids expensive to and fro because they are under your own club. So you often had to train them under your own club, and you need them closer to call them for training any time of the day. So specifically exclusive deals, you all often invest in just your geographically closer area. So if you're in Bilbao, you often get just offers from 1 or 2 big Bilbao teams, and you do not are able to compete in that also to get the best exclusive deal. What happens then because of this? First, younger players are pushed into clubs which they never aspired for, which they do not get good contracts for. At Gov, there is opening up of bidding and more competition among clubs for these players. This competition is better because of several reasons. First, smaller clubs can now compete because they do not have enough money to compete for full exclusive deals, which are pretty much expensive because you are dealing with all young players in the youth academies, versus it is easier for smaller clubs to compete on just 2 or 3 players. They can outbid on because oftentimes young players are not sold in millions, they're sold in like a few $1,000 or few thousand Ks, like 200 3,000 Ks. So smaller clubs at least can compete on these margins against bigger clubs and are able to hire some youth players for them, which they cannot do with $1 million deals which happen in the exclusive deals that opposition wants to defend. But second, external offers, even if opposition gets, they just need to be matched by the partner club on opposition. So even at an opposition best, external offers do come, the partner club do not have to outcompete them or do not even have to really take care of them because the partner club can always flag the contract in front of the youth academy management that you cannot go to them. So we still get more money when those external offers are able to be considered. But third, these partner clubs have incentives to force youth academies to hide talent by forcing these players to only train in the partner clubs training programs are only open to scouts from the partner clubs, reducing capacity for other clubs to even offer because they do not know about the talent in these youth academies because of how hidden and concentrated it has been. But fourthly, the switching clubs is also way harder for these young people. So even if opposition says that, oh, it's just a short-term harm and you can switch clubs way later, this does not happen because oftentimes these kids cannot pay their way out of contracts because these are long-term contracts that these player partner clubs sign. So you often have to pay the fees for why you are breaking the contract pretty early, and they do not have that much money. But also partner clubs put huge buyout fees on these young players. That means transfer clubs need to pay huge buyout fees to even get these players out of these clubs, which again deters other clubs from investing too much into youth players. This means young players are stuck in clubs with long-term contracts that pay them way less than what their market value is. Lesser money hurts their quality of livelihood. On a comparative, when you're able to open up bidding and different clubs are able to compete, because now geography does not matter, because now you're not signing exclusive deals with the whole youth academies. You're only signing exclusive deals with like two or three players. So it's easier for you to keep transporting them to your own club, and it's less expensive for you. So the geography thing does not matter here, and therefore you're able to allow more competition to trickle down. But since you're also able to open up your training, you're able to send your youth to different club scout programs, to different club training programs all over the world. That means more people are able to see your youth, again attracting a lot of clubs to go ahead and give offers and probably compete among themselves. But also just more clubs can compete because one club does not hegemonize. Smaller clubs can come in and they can also give better offers. So we get more money for young players, and young players themselves can select the clubs that they aspired for, the club that they had the poster in their room of, and they're able to get the maximum amount of happiness and maximum amount of money from the careers that they care so much about. Before I go to the second argument about how it hurts youth development and training, POI closing off.
Yeah, Rishabh, which players do you think get this offer, and how often do you think these agreements are even done?
So if you want to talk about that only top youth players are sold on our side of the house, it's not pretty clear, because all clubs need youth players regardless to train them. They often still invest in youth players who haven't done much better in youth leagues on our side of the house regardless, because they often feel these youth players still have a lot of talent that they can be nurtured, that youth academies did not train them in the best ways, or our club can be the best fit for them. So you also get offers from them regardless. So on your side of the house, even if you want to talk about like poor young players get selected and get some money, I don't think that money matters, because they still get on our side of the house in the worst cases. How does it hurt youth development and training? First, youth academies become worse because they get complacent that your youth players will be bought by richer clubs regardless at a price which they cannot decide anyway. So they often cut funding on coaching and training to reduce costs and increase profits. Versus on our side of the house, youth academies still need to be very competitive. They are incentivized to invest in coaching and training to make your players lucrative for more clubs. You are still able to raise money through past deals you keep making as you start earning more money due to the better deals, as I explained before. So I don't think money is really an issue to do coaching. So we get better training and coaching for these youths that allow them to become better players in the professional leagues. Often the youth players you get at opposition, even if you do buy poor players on their side of the house, they are undertrained and suffer in leagues because they can't maintain their skill level and find it tough to accommodate. Coaches often bench them, reducing their playing time and again restricting their capacity to get any future offers and any future money. So they still suffer at opposition.
Okay. I thank the Prime Minister for his speech. I call upon the Leader of Opposition to begin the case for the opposition motion now.
Hi, just confirming, am I audible and visible?
Yep.
Okay, great, thank you. First, a note on counter fiat, then explaining why you get increasing investment into youth sport, and then an argument about increasing competition between academies, which is good for both the youth who participate and the sports overall. First, on a brief note about counter fiat. A lot of our opening government's push seems, in their first argument, seems to be that these contracts are going to be manipulative or are going to kind of trap players in a way that's coercive. Our second argument will interact with this quite neatly, and I'll give the majority of my responses there. But I do just want to note that this debate affords us a high degree of counter fiat, which we would obviously be more than happy to use to improve the resourcing and legal help available to people to understand contracts when they are able to be signed, and to improve regulation around the terms of these contracts. So it's just untrue that these people would be entering into contracts, signing them without any understanding of the legal terms involved. First argument on increasing investment into youth sport. I want to make two notes about the importance of this argument before I begin proving it. The first is this argument will explain why everyone who participates in a youth academy will reap the reward of improved investment, not just the individual players who are actually able to get a contract at the end of that youth academy, because obviously not everyone who goes into one of these academies walks out on the other end with a contract in hand from Barcelona or Real Madrid. But the second frame I want to make is that even for the children who are going to go into these academies either way, it is so much better for them to be able to improve their happiness and improve their enjoyment of the sport if you're able to increase the investment in these academies to a sufficient degree. 3 broad reasons about why this increases investment in youth sport. The first is that clubs are now more likely to invest in these academies because their return on investment is far more certain. That's firstly because you're able to guarantee that you get the best players who come out of those youth academies, which is an automatic win for you in terms of getting that investment and recouping it. But if you have kind of like leftover players or players who are still quite good, but maybe not enough, you want to offer them a contract at the end of that youth academy, you're able to loan out those players to other clubs and still get a return on your investment by earning money through that loan, which improves the ability for those, which improves kind of the amount that clubs are able to get on that return. And if you and obviously the other, I assume the government bench will be like, well, clubs still want to get good players, so maybe they're still likely to provide some amount of funding. But the problem with a response like that is that if you fund players and provide investment in their training and then they don't go on to play for you, that isn't just a waste of money for these clubs, it's an active harm because you spent all this money nurturing talent and improving a player who literally plays against your team, who is the reason why your team might lose, or who is the reason why your team is unsuccessful, which means that every dollar these clubs spend funding players and improving their training and then not getting to hire them at the end is an active threat to these clubs and why these clubs will dramatically reduce the amount in which they fund these youth academies. Second of all, this results in more local investment because exclusivity means that clubs now need to develop other ways of scouting for players and establish their own youth academies beyond just 1 or 2 central ones. And that's excellent because one, as I'll explain in my second argument, one academy is simply not enough to deal with all that with kind of the concerns that come from that level of monopolization. But it also, as I'll explain in impacting, dramatically increases the opportunities for people from diverse backgrounds and in different locations to be able to play in these sports. The third reason why it increases investment is just that now these clubs are competing on the quality of the training they can provide rather than the starting salaries they can provide. Because presumably what this government bench has to defend is you have 1 or 2 central youth academies or you have youth academies that aren't affiliated. And at the end of people graduating those youth academies, clubs will come in and try and bid against each other to be able to get people on those contracts. But that has a couple of problems. First of all, it means that the benefits of club investment is limited to a select number of players who get contracts at the end of graduating from that youth academy, rather than spread between all the people who enter into that youth academy, which as I explained at the beginning of that argument, is a far greater set of people. Secondly, because the competition on salary is much more uncertain, like you can have a player who's really good at 16, get a freak injury, and then your investment is lost, which is a terrible thing for these clubs and means that their competition is, the money that they're investing is far more certain to be spent well rather than potentially wasted under the government bench's side. The third thing is just that the alternative, and if there's kind of the alternative, it's like premature signing instead of have kind of poaching at the end of the youth academies. That's obviously bad because likewise it limits the amount of people helped. But finally, and the fourth reason why this is a problem is just that bidding wars are much harder to compete for smaller clubs or clubs with less funding than they can on scouting. Like if you're a smaller club and you spend $50 million trying to scout for people and Real Madrid spends $100 million trying to scout for people, obviously you're not going to get quite the same level of scouting quality, but you're still more than able to find like talent, find people who, or get to players first and be able to get them on your team. Whereas on the other side, you're very unlikely to be able to compete on bidding wars because the highest bidder will always be able to win out when signing contracts. What are the impacts of this? And I want to make a note that opening government identifies it's very difficult to get funding otherwise. So the scale of all of these impacts is enormous because the government bench concedes it's going to be very difficult to find funding elsewhere. The first is that these clubs just get better for all at the academy. You get better training, better sports physios and sports psychologists and nutrition scientists and that people who can help these people succeed. That's a way that benefit alone, because it's an incredibly long-term benefit, it accrues to everyone who enters into these youth academies rather than just a select few who get contracts. And it means that there's a surplus of good players even amongst people who don't get contracts, which improves the quality of the sport overall and improves the equality of the sport between clubs, because when you have surplus good players who are able to get other contracts when the kind of club who's affiliated with the youth academy doesn't get their first pick, that improves the quality of the sport overall. Second of all, it means that there's more investment in scouting, and particularly in areas that might otherwise not have scouting because these clubs are forced to diversify given they can't all compete in the same areas, which is like how Real Madrid goes into Africa to scout in African soccer leagues, or how top baseball clubs look into the Caribbean to be able to try and find talent there. And third of all, because it's the biggest change in investment is in the underfunded sectors. It's in women's sport, it's in sport in disadvantaged areas, because that's where there currently isn't a lot of youth academies. So that's where you're able to compete. Second argument on increasing competition between academies. The first premise in this argument is just why there's more academies. I'll take a POI from closing government if you had one though. Opening government.
Yeah, not investing in those players just because you're fearful that they will play for the opposition team is a certain harm on your side of the house, because you're never investing. At least on our side of the house, when you're investing, you can be pretty certain that they will come to play for your club because you help them in their careers.
So it's not asserted. I just spent 6 minutes explaining why clubs are more likely to be able to invest on our side, and it's also not asserted that that is kind of an unproven harm to these clubs. It is a certain harm to these clubs that if you spend a lot of money investing in the training of someone who then does not go on to play for your team, you've actually kind of shot yourself in the foot a bit because they're competing against people who you've also spent time training. So it's a waste of funds there. Second argument on increasing competition between academies. First premise: why are there more academies? The big one is just that without exclusive deals, you can't just have one big you can just have one big academy that kind of works for everyone, and clubs will all just poach people from the end of that academy. But that increases barriers geographically. But it also results in a monopolization in a way that's really harmful and lacks accountability for these players, like what we've seen in the NCAA in America, where there are enormous abuse scandals and a silence culture because there's only one set of people at the top rather than a set of people at the top in every single academy. That changes on our side for a couple of reasons. When we get more academies, that's good. It improves accountability, which responds to opening governments make about silencing. It improves quality, and importantly, it increases the pay, especially given argument one about why there's more investment. And that again has the biggest difference in underprivileged sectors of sport, things like women's sport or women's AFL or football, in a way that is deeply meaningful for these people. They no longer have to work second jobs or work 40 hours a week managing a McDonald's. That is a benefit for these sports, and it's a benefit to everyone who enters into these youth academies. Proud to oppose.
I thank the leader of opposition for that speech. I call upon the Deputy Prime Minister to continue the case for the government pledge. Yeah.
Can I be heard?
Yep.
Just a second. You guys in the chat, please do not unmute yourself. Two questions in the speech. Firstly, why smaller academies and smaller clubs are far better off on our side of the house. Secondly, why players are going to be far better off on our side of the house, insofar as you ensure that not all of these players are stuck in loan deals where they cannot escape that loan deal, and why a ban on this model specifically allows you to have better players or better lives for these players. First question then, why are smaller academies going to be better off on our side of the house? And I would just very quickly trivially note that investment is likely to exist to a significant extent on both sides of the house, because youth academies exist still on both sides of the house. We do not have to ban youth academies. So there are still investors who are attached to these youth academies that still want to invest into these youth academies. There are three reasons why there is likely to be more money. One, I would note that instead of matching, you have to pay extra money to get a player, because on side opposition, you can just match the amount of money and you still have an exclusive say over which player you'd want to get. So if I pay $10 and you pay $10 and you have an exclusive right, you probably get the player before I do. Versus on a comparative, if I pay $10 and you pay $10, I can still outcompete you because I also have another ways, I have another say of getting the player in the first place. So I can provide more money to these smaller academies. This is good because if opening opposition cares specifically about smaller academies and just academies in general, we allow more money to be invested into these academies, because you have to compete amongst other academies you have to compete against other clubs to be able to.
Oh wait, sorry, Himan, I can't hear you. My audio just disconnected. Can you pause for a moment?
Okay. Let me know when I can start again.
Oh, sorry, is anyone speaking?
No, so
Ah,
the chair, his audio disconnected. So
okay,
we're just waiting for him.
okay, thank you.
Will we end up proceeding with the round if the chair's unable to reconnect the audio?
We should. Let me double check the protocol for that, but I believe it's 5 minutes. Give me a second.
Hi, sorry, Himan, can you or something?
Yeah, hello, can you hear me?
Okay, yeah, sorry. I don't know why my audio suddenly disconnected in the middle of the speech. I think in the interest of making sure I track everything, because I think I cut off around the 1 minute mark. Could you just restart your speech, please? Thank you so much.
I
Sorry.
I have forgotten exactly where I was.
Yeah,
Uh,
so you just restarted from the top. Yeah.
yeah, okay, that's fine. Do you want me to read out the motion once to see if your audio is fine or?
My audio's working now. Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, no worries, no worries. Okay, I'll start again. Two questions in the speech. Firstly, why smaller clubs are likely to be far better on our side of the house. Secondly, why we have lesser player exploitation, which specifically gets curbed by banning this move, by banning direct contracts with smaller youth academies. First question then, why are smaller clubs better off on our side of the house? And very trivially, I would just note that investment is likely to exist to a significant extent on both sides because youth academies exist and continue to exist on both sides. We don't have to ban youth academies, but rather just the contracts that you have. So investors are still attached to the youth academy, and they know that they can continue to invest into these youth academies because there is obviously not as much of a risk of investment here because you obviously a lot of these younger players don't take nearly as much money as older players that take 10, 20, 15 million euros and stuff like that. But secondly, their potential is incredibly huge. So in the interest of the youth academy, you know that there is likely to be a lot of interest from all of the other big clubs as opposed to a singular big club that can outcompete other clubs, in which case you know that there is likely to be a lot of money to be made on both sides of the house. The conclusion is, insofar as you ban the exclusive contracts, there is likely to be interest from all sorts of clubs, which increases the bid prices significantly. Because on a comparative, if I put $10 and you put $10, you probably get first right over the player as opposed to me because of the exclusive deal that you have. But secondly, I would note that I would note that the opening opposition rebuttal to this, the preemption to this, is that there's likely to be some extent, like they're likely to be cheap to a certain extent on both sides. But I would note that that's still not true because if you don't invest as a bigger club and some other club ends up investing, then you end up losing out on a huge amount of talent pool, which still means that bigger clubs are likely to invest into these younger players to a significant extent because you don't want to lose out on a significant amount of talent pool, and you certainly do not want to lose out to that talent pool to other big clubs like Real Madrid. If they end up getting a bunch of La Masia players, then you end up losing out on a huge amount of talent pool. Thirdly, I would note that opening opposition has to prove that a vast majority of these players are likely to get significant amount of contracts because they sort of just throw it out that all players end up getting all sorts of contracts, but they have to prove it because on both sides of the house, somewhat mediocre players are likely to not get contracts on either side. But at the very least, on our side of the house, when you are from a bigger youth academy, the rep or the reputation attached to the bigger youth academy is significant enough. So even if you're a comparatively mediocre player that does not get bought on their side of the house, because obviously the bigger clubs want just the top talent, on our side of the house, smaller clubs also end up realizing that they can take that they can take these relatively mediocre players for their own football clubs and end up getting and using them in the long run. Lastly, I would note that on their side of the house, most players are bought out and are not used. And this is specifically because they want to outcompete. Bigger clubs want to outcompete other bigger clubs, in which case they end up loaning, or in which case they end up buying these younger players, but they don't specifically end up using them because they realize that they can still loan these players, or you can still bench these players, but you don't have to necessarily end up playing these players because their interest specifically is for other big clubs to not end up competing against them. So they outcompete other bigger clubs by taking up as much of the bigger players as they can. Please relax on the chat. Lastly, I would just note that smaller clubs also find it comparatively far harder to have established youth academies on site opening opposition, because the specific reason for that is that it's far harder to capture the market, because youth academies are obviously somewhat expensive. You have to pay for the coaches, you have to pay for the multiple kids that you need to train, you have to have a lot of gym equipment and things like that. So on both sides of the house, there are youth academies that are still somewhat expensive. The difference on our side is that even if you're from a smaller youth academy, you end up getting selected by smaller clubs. But even if you're from a larger youth academy where you are a relatively mediocre player, you can still, as a smaller club, buy the relatively mediocre player and hence diversify the amount of players that you have, which means the smaller clubs have a greater chance of competing against these larger clubs as opposed to on the comparative. And lastly, I would just note that the point about Africa and women and things like that don't really matter, because obviously bigger clubs end up doing that for PR incentives, like they do it to show equality in football as opposed to wanting to specifically invest into the footballing clubs of Africa. So I don't think this specifically matters. Second part of this speech, why are players far better off on our side of the house, and why that specifically matters? Because I would note that the ban or ban of these exclusive contracts is the only way in which you can regulate the ways in which players go to these bigger clubs, because bigger clubs will continue to have disproportionate control in the absence of these bans, because you don't really have to outcompete the previous bid by a significant amount. You can outcompete it by a smaller amount and you can still realize that you can capture these players. But the ban specifically stops that from happening, because now you don't have to just outcompete by the smallest of margin, you have to outcompete their bid by a fairly big margin. This means that there is a lot more money poured into these youth academies, because these youth academies get bigger bids as opposed to smaller bids on site opening opposition. Before I continue, CEO.
Yeah, it's really uncertain how small clubs compete, because you yourself say it requires a lot of money to outbid a big team. So in your world, how does that happen considering small teams don't have that amount of money to outbid
This
somebody?
is the problem, Sehaj. So youth players don't require a lot of money to end up like it doesn't require a significant amount of money to get these youth players as opposed to like totally like developed players, because obviously the amount of risk that is attached to these youth players is significantly high, and since they're incredibly young, the amount of money required to get these is also relatively low, which means that obviously on both sides of the house, the amount of money that is required to get these players is relatively lesser. The difference, and the critical difference here, is that on their side of the house, insofar as you have an exclusive contract, you have an exclusive right over where this player goes. And this means that you are often stuck in a cycle of not getting player development because you're often benched. You don't have an ability to escape that club, and you know that you can't, because obviously you have reputation attached to being in a bigger club. So you don't want to leave that club, but you also don't get player minutes on a comparative. On our side of the house, insofar as there is more equality of competition, this specifically means that you also have more player development. So you get to play against bigger clubs a lot more, and in the process, you obviously get to clock in more minutes. This also increases the player investment value that you have, but also it increases the amount of reputation that the youth academy you came from had. Because insofar as a lot more players can end up playing in the football league, they also end up getting a lot more experience. They also end up increasing their own value in the process. This specifically means that the average player has a lot more money, a lot more disposable money on their side of the house. But secondly, insofar as they have better lives and insofar as they can clock in more minutes, they also get a lot of the crucial experience that is missing on side opening opposition, where they are continuously benched, where they do not have the ability to leave that club and end up playing for a better club, which actually ends up using them.
I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for his speech, calling upon the Deputy Leader of Opposition. Please hear here.
Opening opposition will win this debate in 3 ways. Firstly, I'll flip opening government's claims about protecting young players by explaining how that is what happens under our side. Secondly, I'll talk about investment, and finally about competition and equality between clubs. Firstly, on protecting young players, opening government's best claim is under our side, you're stuck to one club who can exploit you. Firstly, our counter model is able to mitigate this by regulating the most pernicious forms or versions of these contracts. But secondly, and more importantly, the premise of their argument is that under our side, there are few academies to go to, and young players are uninformed about which academies or clubs might be super exploitative and which ones which will actually take care of you. And they say that this is because there's only 1 or 2 offers that you can potentially get from academies in your area. But firstly, even if that was the case, that's still sufficient competition. Even if there are only 2 academies that are offering you spots, those are still, you're still able to go to the one that you know has better conditions and better prices. And that is exactly the sort of thing you would know. You'd be able to talk to players who previously worked at those academies. People in your industry, like your agent, would be able to give you advice about it. But secondly, there's a huge incentive for clubs and academies to scout talent in wide areas to cast a wide net, as for instance Barcelona does in Africa, or as the MLB clubs do in the Dominican Republic, which explains why it's often 5 or 10 academies who are offering you places and not just 2. But the second response is that academies have reputations to maintain, which explains why they're unlikely to treat players in the way that open government explains. Because if they treat their current players well, they'll have a stream of future ones who want to join that academy. Whereas if they don't offer them proper medical care, if they don't offer them high wages, the stream of talent that is coming into those academies in the first place will drive up. And clubs who have exclusive deals with these academies obviously will put pressure on those academies to treat players well, because they want to have a deal with the academy that the next Messi wants to go to. Thirdly, clubs also want these players to be happy because they want the players to keep playing with them into the long term, especially if they've invested a large amount of money in their development, which explains why the clubs, when they're working with these academies, are also likely to encourage them to treat these players well. However, furthermore, the best way to protect young players, as I've explained, is to give them choice about which academy to go to. But the problem under their side, as we explained to No Response, is that there are far, far fewer academies. Why is that? Under our side, clubs have to set up their own academies to ensure that, and do their own investment, to ensure that they get young talent into the future, because they can't just have a scenario of the system as it would work under their side, where 1 or 2 very large, very wealthy academies are the ones that all the players go to, and they sell players to every single club. Why is that system under their side so bad? Look to the NCAA in the United States, where effectively every young player in collegiate sport signs contracts with the NCAA because they have an effective monopoly, and no club has an exclusive deal with a particular academy. That's the system as it exists under their side. A system where in the NCAA, players don't get salaries, there's abuse scandals in gymnastics, concussions, and healthcare issues in college football. However, under our side, when there are many more academies because each club has its own academy, young players have choice over which academy they go to, which means the wages that they receive in those academies go up, and abuse and negligence goes down. Because if one academy doesn't give proper medical care, no one will ever go there in the future. So the real harm about young players being exploited is them being locked into academies, which is what happened under their side, not clubs who have positive incentives to treat the players well and keep them into the future. That explains why we flip the main benefit that is explained at PM and are winning on that metric in the debate. Next, though, I'll talk about investment. And I think OG's responses on investment are pretty woeful. The first thing they say is academies will still get investment because the academies make money and they want to do a good job, so people will give them money. Firstly, that's symmetric. Under our side, we have 2 pools of investment into academies and also clubs. But secondly, the problem with that is the profit that an academy makes of training one really good player is small because they get a one-time check for a club. However, the benefit that a club gets from investing in a player when they're in an academy is decades of trophies, millions more dollars of bums in seats and broadcasting revenue when they're doing well. And we're the side that gives the clubs a vested interest into doing that investment. So that's why we get exponentially more investment under our side. The second thing they say is, well, you bid for players more under their side when they're about to go pro, and you get more money being spent in that way. But that's more money being spent, but it's not more investment into things that are meaningful. That's wasted money because the next Messi, yeah, he might get paid more under their side as clubs are doing the bidding because he doesn't have an exclusive deal with a particular club. But that's not meaningful investment that we describe that actually helps scouting players, that provides them with nutrition. The meaningful investment that we describe is MLB clubs going into the Dominican Republic, looking at kids playing baseball there, providing them with housing, providing them with nutrition, and casting a wide net that is good for the future of the sport that secures high quality players and talent into the future. The final thing they say is clubs have to invest to get players no matter what. But the problem is you only ever do that investment when there is a positive ROI. But under their side, when there's a really good player, if there are 10 clubs who are all investing and saying, hey, we'll do training for you, we'll give you some money. There might only be a 10% chance that that player eventually signs with you. So obviously you would not invest that money. You'd be making a loss. Or for a few kind of all right players, you never invest in them under their side, because what's the point if you don't have an exclusive deal with them? Whereas we say clubs invest in a much wider pool of players under our side, and Arwyn explains why that's good for the sport overall. Before I weigh investment, I'll take closing. Opening? Anyone?
Yeah, it's harder for clubs to invest in wider pool because they need to sign big exclusive deals, which are much more expensive. That's why the investment is risky on your side. On our side, the investment is less risky because you can invest in few players globally.
No, so when you have an exclusive deal, you have to spend less money on them, right? Because someone's like finished their academy career, and now they can only sign with you, so you can pay them the actual price. The problem is under your side, that's when you have bidding wars that drive up the price, which precludes actual investment into things like scouting or nutrition or healthcare or housing for up-and-coming players. In terms of weighing investment, I think we've already done this pretty effectively. It has a huge impact for training quality and for quality of life for players as they get treatment, they get housing, vulnerable young players get protection, and that investment is also the best way to protect young players. So even if you care about opening government's metric and you don't believe my earlier flip, giving them money to have healthcare and nutrition and those sorts of things is a more direct form of protection. Their response on underfunded areas of investment are clubs have PR investment incentives to invest in women's sport or poorer areas, but that's totally an insufficient response. Like, that explains you do a little bit of it so you can put it in an ad. We explain you do lots of it so you can get good players, or you can get players that help you win trophies into the future, which explains why we get hundreds more time investment there. Finally, on competition between clubs, there are two reasons it's better under our side and clubs are more equal. Firstly, competition is easier on the basis of training and scouting than it is for bidding wars later down the line. Because that's a poorer club like West Ham can spend $20 million on scouting and still do pretty well with that, even if Manchester City spends $50 million. But when you have a bidding war for players later on, that $20 million gets you nowhere and you're always stuck getting the worst talent. The second reason competition is higher is because scouting and training when players are younger involves a degree of randomness. It's difficult to tell if someone is the next Messi or if they're just some guy. And that luck means that smaller or poorer clubs can get a windfall sometimes despite spending less because they can just happen to have a really good player in their academy. So if you care about clubs being equal and the competition of the league overall, clearly our model is far better for it as opposed to a system where you have bidding wars under their side and all the top talents go to the highest bidder.
Okay, I thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition for the speech. I call upon the Member of Government to open the case for the closing half of the debate. Here.
Hi, can I hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Here I on chat please, and I preferably take from closing. Opening. Starting in 3, 2, 1. I think this motion has an aspect of economy. And in the economy, people likely to raise the importance of human realities. We want to talk about the human real analysis and the behavior. This is the most important thing in this debate. Then, three things from the member of government. Firstly, why really good talented children is likely to give up to go to such an academia, even though there's a prestigious good academia still exists on their side. Secondarily, why local and youth academia totally can get some more enough investment on our side. I want to directly respond to the opening opposition, and since OZ have a really silly mechanisms, I want to provide the really important mechanisms. And lastly, I want to talk about the big famous youth academia also increase the quality on our side and really shit on their side. Firstly, why some talented children is likely to have no access to such a good youth academia in the first place and likely to give up. Note, this is really important burden because on the opening government, on the OZs, if children still have access to the such good academies, anyway, children can try to enter such a strong big academy and take an entrance exam. And if they fail, which just means you have less talented. So the burden to prove why such even talented children have no access to such a good academy is really important burden in this debate. Then we prove this. Firstly, because big academy is sometimes geographically far from you in the local cities where you live on. And this is really important for especially local cities. Since local cities is likely to pay a really less payment for your father, since your family has a really small monies, you can't pay such a high expensive city cost, city living cost, housing cost, and so on. And also such a family care is really important for the children insofar as they are really immature. Secondarily, big academia is likely to require a more higher fee because this is a monolistic, which means anyway, big academia can easily recruit many famous, many talented children from the urban cities, which is enough to, tough to paying such a high expensive fee, which means local children is likely to give up to paying such a high expensive fee. And lastly, even poor talented children don't go to the even local youth academia because it is low certainty. I'll explain the reasons why this is low certainty after that. But anyway, insofar as you are the poor, you have no access to the good academia. Then the impact is very simple. Even if opening opposition is true, there is still competition between such a good, strongest academia exists. I think still our argument stands because simply there's many children give up their dream. This is really bad thing. And also, as an audience, we can see the next Luka Modric in such a local cities. This is really horrible. So we obviously take this debate in this first point. Then, second argument. Why youth academia can get enough investment on our side? I want to directly respond to the opening options. There's three reasons. Firstly, complicated economy motion. This is a complicated economy motion. Why this is complicated? Because club is a buyer, but at the same time they are seller, which means if the team became weak, they are if they can't appears a really less performance, which just means simply fan will criticize those teams or they might leave from such teams. So in such cases, investors is likely to leave or criticize such a club because this club didn't fulfill their responsibility to cultivate good players. So which means in order to cultivate the players, club necessarily also invest money into not only their sports club but also into the academia, even on our side of the house. This is a clear mechanism why you must do it on the economic analysis. Second reasons, those club teams highly likely to go to the local academia because and likely to go to watch the tournament by themselves and directly invest the money into the talented children. It is academia. Why? Because club is always, of course, understand enough equipment, enough investment is necessary to cultivate and unleash their potential. So on our side, when club lose most easy monolistic way, they necessarily go to each tournament by themselves and necessarily invest sports player one by one. Those things uniquely happen on our side. And note this is a more efficient way to cultivate good players. There is a more better talented individuals likely to get more better equipment on the academy because if the club finds a really good talented individual in such a sports academia, they are likely to invest. And the last reason, this is also really important. I want to expand what Ozzy said. Club started such a good player even in the local academy. Why? I want to explain the reasons why on their side they never do it. Simple reasons. Club already invested tons of the money onto the most major club, which means they already invest a sunk cost. They feel this is a sunk cost. They don't want to believe that this is a sunk cost, so they have a really biased glasses to such a good player, and they want to believe, oh, this club, since I invest money, this club necessarily provides the most brilliant players. Then, in such cases, you are likely to hire such a good player from these places. In such cases, you're likely to can't take this bias glasses. But on our side, you can. Sorry, I can take a beer. Sorry, you can't take up. You can take off bias glasses on our side. It likely cause a cascade, which means which implies one local academy more likely to produce a Real Madrid player on our side, because Real Madrid necessarily such a good players one by one on each such a academias. In such cases, this is a tipping point for the local investor to invest their money into even into such a local academias. And also sports club other sports club also started to search such a good player into the local cities. This is the actual reasons why local city gets a bit more strong power. And lastly, I explain why big famous youth academia also increase the quality on our side, because on their side, there's a corruption likely to happen and they are likely to decrease the quality. Why decrease the quality? Simple reasons. It's because this is a monopolies. Anyway, as I already explained, why club had very strong bias, they are likely to anyway hire the sports player from your club academias. In such cases, academia don't need to increase their quality anymore. But more importantly, they are highly likely to have a human connections each other with a club and academia. In such cases, corruption happens. It's very horrible. For those reasons, beg to propose.
I think the member of Government speech should call upon member Paul, please.
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah.
Perfect. Just setting up my time. Cool. Hope I'm visible as well. Starting at my first word, POIs, whenever. I'll take one from OG. We have had countless examples within sports how players have lost the stability which they could have gotten and have lost their careers through life-threatening injuries, and have had no team supporting them because they had no proper contract in place and they had no career to then have a life upon. It's abhorrent that this debate till now does not focus on individual players, but wants to talk about high-quality teams and development and competition within that. OG partially mentions the benefit of players. CEO is going to be the first team to explain why this gives a better experience for individual players, provides them the stability they need, and even in the worst case scenario where they don't turn out to be the prodigies which everybody in the world thought, they can at least lead a decent life, which is the most important and the most vulnerable impact within this debate. The first thing I want to do though is give better response to opening government than what OO tried, because there's a tension in OG case, right? They say small clubs can necessarily go and completely outbid bigger teams because the price of these players initially is very, very low because they are youth players. Sure, but the difference is this, and they're twofold. One, you can outbid bigger teams right now because these are unknown talents. But secondly, I also don't think that's the case, because if these are very, very good talents today, even bigger players have scouting teams and scouting agencies who are going to know of this talent. So they're probably going to be the first to jump the bandwagon and wait for these players bigger and outbid you at all points of times. That means they're going to get these players over and above these smaller clubs. But secondly, even if smaller clubs on your side are able to get these players to begin with, after 2 or 3 years, because you don't have a certain contract, when they actually make it big, a big team can come and sweep them off the ground immediately. O never explains why that happens. The reason why that happens is because oftentimes when you can't have a player for a long term, you only want them at the peak of their performance. So probably somebody will not take a younger player right now, but a big team like Man United will wait for a player to blow up big and then outcompete and outbid you in a complete auction and get years of your talent wasted. But secondly, bidding literally works on increasing prices. If the demand for player increases and multiple teams get interested, any good team can outbid you because the prices for that player immediately goes up. This this proves the tension in OG case, because they cannot prove to you why smaller teams can actually outcompete big teams in any way, but rather prove a worse-off scenario for these individuals. And they also never actually explain how these youth centers operate, and they're actually operated by the very clubs which own these players at all points of time. Let's get to players now. The first thing I would explain is that good players and prodigies exist on a spectrum. That means, sure, there might be only a couple of Messis and Ronaldos, but there are a lot of tons and tons of good players out there, which smaller and mediocre teams and clubs can actually have an exclusive contract with. This is true in status quo in the IPL as well. There are a lot of players who earlier were mediocre players. They were not the next big thing in the world of cricket, but teams acquired them and signed long-term deals with these people because they wanted them to be the face of their teams. And these teams don't have to be the best out there, because even if there's a quid pro quo situation where both the team who's a mediocre team and a player who's not the next prodigy can get some form of stability, it's a benefit for both of them. So what we want to explain is that we agree with OG Frame. These agreements might be signed very, very frequently. And if it's signed frequently, that means more and more ordinary players like that can actually hedge their risk and have a stable career at all points of time. Characterization is misses. Why is it that you require the stability in football and any other sport which is very, very competitive? Couple of reasons for that. One, there are so many damn good players, which means there's uncertainty about your position and opportunities you may get in the open market. Tomorrow you might be part of a team, but if you don't perform in one season, there's a kid who's much better than you, ready to outcompete you in a single second. But secondly, there's PR scrutiny at all points of time. You are overlooked in your each small step you're going to take as a sports person. So one fuck up and you're done on social media and your career is literally over. It's true in literally all sport because of the pressure which is arriving of social media. Second, one injury can end your career. In any high competitive sport, if you get an injury and you can't make a comeback, you necessarily lose out on this income you were able to get initially. But secondly, any revival of your career also becomes impossible. Thirdly, or if this agreement is widespread, that means not necessarily you have to become the greatest in order to hedge your risk in these injuries. Because note, these agreements also cater to all of these things. They exist in terms of having a continuous base salary in the agreement. They have housing ability in the agreement. You have insurance claims within the agreement. You have injury support in the agreement. That means you can hedge your risk in these multiple facets of the sport, which otherwise would require you to deal on your own or require you to continuously perform at the highest level in order to achieve all of these things. But lastly, what is the comparative? Insofar as you can have mediocre clubs or clubs at all levels signing exclusive contracts, you would have more and more players getting the opportunity. If you ban this right now, that means no player can get in the long-term contract, and the pressure to perform in the short-term increases on these players multi-fold. Why is that the case, and why is the experience of these players going to be much better off in the comparative? The number one reason is time. Why is it that in a short-term nature, in the current system, when you have to bid and get players for a 1 year or a 1.5 year contract, the patience is less. The reason is because you have to justify the high amount you have paid within this auction. So if I paid for a player right now, I have to justify their existence for their performance to be good in the next season. So the aim is very short-termist. But on the second hand, if you invest in a term for a longer period of time, you invest in them for a long time continuously. So the more and more you invest each single day, the more and more time you give to the player to grow. What is the benefit for the player in that? You get time to grow rather than being able to perform the very next day, which means this patience is very good for the player, because in scenarios where they're taking time to adjust to the biggest level out there in sport, they can adjust largely with time and not require to do it very quickly. OGPOI.
Players still sign contracts on our side of the house for stability, just with clubs they really wanted to go to and higher salaries. Smaller
No,
clubs
that's
still
not
get
how it
mediocre
works.
players.
Even if you sign contracts with the one passionate club you wanted, the reason is because that club does not have exclusivity over you, their patience is nothing. They want you to perform in the next season. So the pressure on the player is multifoldly high on your side as compared to ours. Because even in the worst case scenario, of course, players like clubs want players to perform on our side as well. But the patience is more because they have to justify their signing of the next big prodigy. That means they're more patient with players on our side on the comparative versus on your side. Even if you get to the club you want and you can enact that choice, what the fuck do you do with that choice when you have a broken foot 2 years later? You can't play the sport, and because no club had an exclusivity contract over you, nobody has a liability to take care of you after the next season, which means the experience for a player is necessarily much better. Answer to your POI. What are the impacts of this? One, we think there's higher patience amongst players because of two specific reasons. One, because there are more data points on that that player from the onset. You know the training style of the player. The club knows what injuries are concerns for this player. They know what medical advice to give to them. But secondly, there's close monitoring of their daily trainings, which means the access to these clubs is so close and so like regular and everyday basis that the experience for these players is extremely better on each individual day. One, we're able to have more stable careers for players in the worst case scenario, which makes this the most important and the most vulnerable impact within this debate. But secondly, create a quid pro quo situation where stability is a good thing for both the sports person as well as the team. This is something which no team talks about. And as long as we're able to prove to you a certain impact of a player being better in a vulnerable scenario where every player is literally on the cutthroat competition, this is the most certain impact within this debate rather than the speculative stuff coming out of any other team. Proud to be on CU.
I thank the member of opposition for the speech. I'd like to remind all speakers to please keep your speeches to under 7 minutes and 4 seconds. Without further ado, I call upon the government whip. Here.
Okay, am I audible?
Yeah.
Thank you. So, starting my speech in 3 p.m. Okay, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. CO, OGO. Firstly, let's take down the CO. Their case is only about players can get the long-term contract. Three things to say. One, I don't know why it's the asymmetric argument in today's round, because what they said as a club incentive, they want to contract in the short term because we cannot expect what the next term performance of this player is. Symmetrically exists in both sides of the house. Why this academia and the club team rebel contracts would have any types of changes in their argument. But next thing to say is it is highly speculative. We have explained tons of reasons the why in the academia scale, which is directly incentivized by today's motion, changes in the every teams, but they only talk about how the club team works in the club team world. It is very speculative argument which is unrelated to today's motion, at least in the less degree than are all of the other teams. And the last thing to say is I'm really not sure why the long-term contract is always good, because we can come up with the many situations. You're a talented player, you're going to go into the Champions League and going to go to the better teams, but this long-term contract will impede you to play at the better clubs. But also your coaches might be abusive and you want to escape from that club, but the contract would impose you on to stay in that clubs. I don't know why this is in the first place good, and all of the mechanism is very speculative compared to the other teams. Then their team is out. Moving on to the opening government. Why we override opening government, and I think why their case have some problems. Opening government, I think, mainly have said 3 things. The first thing is unfair contract. The problem of this argument is always competed by the opening position. They said, 1, it is not exclusive because the opening team, opposition team has feared to say this is a special, we can educate about the contract with these kind of things. But secondly, there are unproven premises. That's why this unfair contract would happens, and why the sports players would have no ability to move out to the other clubs. It is, I think, very speculative and somehow not exclusive argument. But next thing they said is, I think, the most important thing in the round, which is about investment towards the academics and investment towards the sports players. But they have 2 problems here. The first problem is they only talk about the investment towards the individual players, not to talk about the academy in and of itself, which is always claimed by the opening positions by saying academy's benefit is spread among all the people existing in academy, but the players' benefit is only concentrated on that specific players. That is why our extension about the investment towards the academia have high value than their side of the house. But the next problem is they don't explain the reason why the investment towards academia exists in their side of the house. They just explain why this is less investment towards academia at the PM speech, but no explaining why that increases after taking this motion, which is done by my partner. And the last thing they said about the DPM is happiness of the player, because the players have more chance to play at the higher level. But I'm really unsure why it's the case, because there are no like the expansion of the pie, the benches of the class will suddenly like expand by taking these motions. Therefore, I think this argument is just symmetric because there's always competition of the better players and competent players, and some of them, the top players, can only exist on this club team football. Therefore, I think the most important point in today's round is how the investment towards the academia goes in a very daily level. But I think two extraneous like weighing towards their argument. The first weighing is about obviously the mechanism, the most important mechanism in investment of the towards the academy is coming from my partner. And the next thing is we have explained more the prior level how the player would be better off. They explain the graduating level players who can make a contract with the club team football and belonging to the academies and maybe like 20 years with these companies. We have explained why the entering level of these academy players, such as 15 years old soccer ball who want to be the next Messi, would have more say and participation to the specific club, specific youth academies. This is good, I think, because because it is the most way to expand the broadest pie of the pyramid of the soccer structure. And I think if we can broaden the pies, and like we have more possibility to pick and choose the more competent players from like the potential local players, maybe they are dismissed in their side of the house. Then having said that, I'm going to talk about the opening positions. The opening position mainly talk about, I think, the investment point. And the best claim which they made is there's uncertain benefit. Even if we invest on the specific players, they would not come to my clubs and we will not invest on that players. This is very unlikely. If you see the example of like the NBA or NFL, these kind of the players, this kind of situation, there's often the best player are pick and choose by the university level and not like the club team and have no option of the fast prior seat for the players, but still investing into the youth class, but still investing into NBA teams and investing into the universities. Why? Because of the three reasons my partner have already explained. One, individual connection is needed. To make a deal, you need the consent of the player, what the player think, and how the player is competent is. To do that, the best way to appeal to this player is to go into the university and investing into the university and talking with the individual players. That is why that connection still exists in outside the house and maybe on a far much greater scale. And the next thing to say is a local push. Obviously, the Barcelona people want to see like a strong Barcelona and strong Cantera for like their husband and their son is playing in the Cantera, these kind of things. This is what the local people want, and local people push for the clubs to invest in the local field. But before moving to the third reason, I'll take your point. Yeah, open.
If protecting young players is the biggest benefit in this debate, OO explains that A, the impact of investment in academy improves the health, wealth, and protection of young players.
Okay,
and
I think
providing choice over academies for young players protects against abuse and ensures good treatment. How does
I think your benefit is concentrated on the specific clubs. I'm going to explain that. Then I have already explained why at the same level or even at slightly decrease, some level of investment still happens in outside the house. This is obvious. Then the problem on today's round is where the investment would go. I said the investment would diversify in outside the house and investment would centralize in their side of the house because the only Barcelona or like Real Madrid's incentive is to invest on the Cantera, invest on the La Masia because then they can get the first priority seat from the best players who are trained by the best equipment. But it doesn't happen in outside the house. That is why you have to invest, you have to diversify the portfolio into the many of the local clubs. That's good because we can expand the pie of the participation of the soccer clubs. That's the first priority of any players to come in today's round. So I think I'm very proud to propose this motion. But in addition to that, I think like young players, the mental is very important because like they have to move to another cities. They have to say goodbye to their proximate friends, and that's inertia is somehow not good. For these reasons, I'm very proud to propose.
I thank the government for the speech, calling upon the opposition whip, please.
Yep, I'll just start in 20 seconds. Thank you. Yep. Am I audible and visible?
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, my name is Dhruv. Prefer pronounce he/him. I'll definitely take one PY from OG. You can unmute after the 5th minute. I'll take one. I try to take one from CG. I'm not sure if I'll have the time. All right. Starting my speech. In 3, 2, 1, and go. The world of football is really, really uncertain. Any injury that you might suffer from can literally end your career. If another good player comes up, that reduces your value and you can be pushed out of a club and you can be pushed out of a company in the first place. This is something that no side takes into account. It's that in instances when things go wrong, that you have a safety net of stable income that you earn every month that you're able to use as an athlete in the first place. 9 out of 10 athletes aren't going to become big football players. They aren't going to be the next Messi. They aren't going to be the next Ronaldo. They just want to earn the next paycheck so they're able to pay their rent and they're able to pay for their expenditures and they're able to live a good quality, stable life in the first place to begin with. This is a frame which goes uncontested and no side takes into account. It's about those average players which get stable contracts and they're able to earn money for their families. Even if they don't become the next big star, we are okay with taking that trade-off in the first place. But weighing of this is really important. Even if some better athletes don't fulfill their potential in our side of the world because they're locked in contracts, at least some average players, they're able to ensure good, stable, certain income in our side of the world, and they're not thrown out when they don't perform in the next cycle. And this is the marginal benefit that we are able to at least get in our side of the world. But before that, a few rebuttals. The claim from closing government is that investment gets better in their side and investment is worse in our side of the world. Notice that investment is a lot better in our side because we're able to achieve economies of scale. Because when clubs and academies are building upfront stadiums and upfront infrastructure, they are willing to invest more money because they're able to generate more per capita income from the investment that they are putting in the first place. Which means for you to achieve economies of scale, you require certainty and stability in the quality that you're able to provide to your athletes, which means quality of every single athlete per capita increases in our side of the world because you're willing to provide them with better quality infrastructure. But second, and this is towards closing government, if you're talking about mental health, it's a lot better in our side of the world because you don't face a lot of pressure that if you don't perform, you're going to be thrown out. You have that mental stability that even if I don't perform in the next cycle, I still have the capacity to stay in that club and still showcase my performance in the long term. Mental stability is completely ignored on the side of the opening government and closing government because you can be disposable and you can be thrown out when you don't perform, and mental certainty is something you get in our side of the world. But I want to start with some responses to opening government as well. The claim is that, oh, information asymmetry exists and these contracts are bad. Couple of reasons why information asymmetry doesn't exist. First, notice that people around the child are more likely to seek out information because they already know that this child has a lot of potential. Because if you're being offered a contract, that means that you have some amount of talent already present in you, which means people around you are more willing to seek out information. But second, a lot of parents and a lot of people around that child are going to see him as a tool to achieve upward social mobility, which means even if parents are selfish, they want the best contract for their child because if the child is able to earn the maximum amount of money, that also increases the income for the parents in and of themselves to begin with. But third, notice that a lot of people around that child are going to see that child as a representative of their own dreams, which means when the child gets the best contract offered, parents see it as an extension of their identity because they see that child's dream being fulfilled as their own dream being fulfilled, and this is something which pushes them to get the best contract for their child in the first place. What is the impact out of all of this? In most instances, children have good people around them which are going to get them good contracts. How do they get them good contracts? They're going to pool their resources and they're going to hire good lawyers so they're able to negotiate terms better for that child when these children are entering those contracts in the first place. So if opening government's problem is that you enter bad contracts, we don't think that happens because of the environment that exists around that child to begin with. Specifically, this is something which is completely ignored by them to begin with. Their second claim is, and this is something which is really funny, oh, smaller clubs play less money, 50, 100 euros, 200 500 euros, and that's a good thing. We think that's a really bad thing for these players, right? Because if you are putting less money, when the athletes are injured, that also means that you take those athletes from your team. That also means that these athletes are more disposable in your side of the world. In our side of the world, even when these athletes suffer long-term injuries, they have stable contracts, so they're able to pay their rent and they're able to have that money for themselves in the long term. In our worst case scenario, this is something you don't get in their side of the world. Mental health and mental certainty also increases your performance in our side of the world, because you're always anxious in the opening government's world whether you're going to be thrown off the team, whether you can be replaced or whether you cannot be replaced. Mental certainty and mental health is something which is crucial for these players' performance and development, and we are the only team which is able to achieve that in the first place. What's our extension? And let's start weighing our extension against opening teams in the first place. Our extension is simple. Notice that a value of player is relative to the club which is buying them, which means for a smaller club, an average level player is something which is really valuable, which means they're going to give them exclusive contracts. They're going to give them a lot of money, because for them, this is something that they can afford, and this is something that is going to help them a lot in the first place. Let's weigh on intensity of harm. Notice in our side of the world, when you're able to earn long-term money for yourself, that means that you're able to hedge your risk against instances which are going bad in the first place. Opening government doesn't protect athletes which are thrown off teams. Opening government's athletes are more disposable than our athletes in the closing opposition's comparative, and that means intensity of harm is a lot higher in their side of the world, because you don't have the capacity to pay your expenses when you're thrown out of a team. In our side of the world, you have long-term stability. Yes, opening government, you are.
Patient just sounds like benching mediocre players who cannot fit in your club, which hurts their income regardless and is more certain than potential of injuries, which can happen to anyone any day.
Problem with opening government is that they don't realize when you get long-term contracts, it's not a bad thing. There is also a salary column within that long-term contract, which means even when you're injured, you at least have some stability in our side of the world. In their side of the world, you can be thrown off. This is a comparative that they don't deal with, and that cannot win them this debate in the first place. Let's start weighing against opening opposition as well. Opening opposition talks about when everything goes right, when players are able to develop, when they're able to perform, when they're able to earn money. They don't take the worst case instances into account when these players don't perform well. But notice on quantity and on scale, this is the most likely. 9 out of 10 players aren't the next Messi. 9 out of 10 players aren't the next Ronaldo, which means in our comparative, we are dealing with more players on scale, and we're able to provide them the stability and certainty on scale to these players and to these average players in the first place. This is something that opening opposition never does. Opening opposition just mentions that smaller clubs are going to be able to just hire mediocre players, but what happens to them after that? What happens to them in the worst case scenario? We think this is the most important scenario to deal with, right? Because if everything can go right, both sides don't have a comparative, because good athletes can get benefits everywhere. But in instances where things go wrong, we are the people who are able to protect these athletes and hedge their risk against the worst case in the first place. Very proud to oppose.
Okay, I thank everyone for the debate. Please virtually